start bringing the people in from the waiting room?
Happy birthday, Scheherazade Khan.
What up, everybody? What's happening? How we feeling? What's cracking? Do you guys like the little music fading out? I thought it was really sexy. Worked really hard on it. So thumbs up if you approved of the music fading out. 2 thumbs up from Jen, all the way from Australia. What's cracking? What's popping? How's everybody feeling tonight? Ken Eaton, how are you feeling right now? How's your day going? Give me one word to describe how the last 24 hours has been for you. Also, I like your hat. Oh, Ken's trying to figure out how to unmute. No, you can't figure it out. Let's go with Jonathan Trope. Oh, Jonathan Troper's here. What's up, man? How you feeling? How's your day going?
My day is going pretty well. It's a busy work day, and when we get off, there are a couple of things I'm going to be doing when we're done with the conversation.
Okay, we'll keep it short for you. Rainy Contestano, what's up? How you feeling? How's your day?
My day has been powerful so far.
Powerful. Why has your day been powerful? You can tell everybody, all these strangers you never met, why you've had such a powerful day.
Some strangers. It's been very transformational. I took a big step in my life, and like,
fuck yeah,
creating my business. And
can we all give a round of applause? Big steps for Ray. Can't even say your name right, but I'm proud of you. Well done.
But how would
Rainy?
Hi Yungi.
Yeah, see, I'm gonna fuck that up. I'm not even gonna try it. I'm sorry, but it sounds beautiful. It sounds amazing. All right, somebody else. Y'all got some difficult names tonight. Jesus, Shirazade. Tell me, why did you come tonight? Why are you here?
I came tonight because the question was so exciting and curious. Like, can the thing to end racism cause more racism? So
I love that.
Also her birthday.
Oh shit, we got a birthday. Let's give another round of applause for a birthday in the house. I see Dice, one of my friends from college. What's up, man? Why'd you come tonight? Besides to show off your new haircut.
Howdy. I came tonight to learn a thing or two.
A thing or two? You might walk away with 3 if you're lucky. Let's see, Jen. Why did you come tonight? Why are you here? Why'd you pop onto the chat?
I think like there's a really interesting conversation happening in Australia, which is reflecting what's going on in America, but I have no one around me to talk to about it. So I'm just curious.
I love that you say that. Because for me, when Christina from the lovely WeDeepen Incorporated reached out to me about doing this little series, what you're saying, Jen, is a big reason as to why I said yes. Because I feel like we're currently operating in a culture in which we're not allowed to have conversations. And if we are allowed to have conversations, they can only be in one certain way. And if you offend somebody, you got to get the fuck out.
Yeah.
Or if you say something inappropriate, like you're canceled and nobody wants to talk to you ever again, right?
Yeah.
And for me, as somebody who just talks a lot, I didn't like that very much. I wanted to be a part of spaces where I can see how I can learn, grow, develop, and evolve by hearing from different perspectives. What would happen when I had interesting conversations with interesting people? So that's kind of the intention of what's going to be happening tonight. And with that said, I also want to add a disclaimer that I think that we also live in a time in which whenever we say we're going to have big conversations, people are like, oh my God, it's going to be so much energy and it's going to be stressful and it's going to be contentious. It's like, we can also have fun with this. We can also laugh. I care a lot about the human experience. I care a lot about talking about the human experience. And I also realize that shit is not that serious. So I just invite us all to remember that we can also laugh in this process. We can also laugh at ourselves in this process, right? I'm going to be laughing at myself a lot. And the last note is that if I make a joke tonight and you do not laugh, you will be removed from the chat. You will not be invited to join back in. Cool? Everybody in agreement with that? Fantastic. Brian is so ready to not laugh at my jokes. Fantastic. That pretty much sums up what we're doing here tonight. The format of Real Talk is, what does it look like when we have interactive conversations? So it's not going to be just a panel of me and the other guys talking at you for the next hour and a half. The idea is that we'll make some opening statements, and then I want to hear from Jen. I want to hear from Daniel. I want to hear from Dice, and I want to hear what's happening in your mind. And I want to let you know that tonight and on this format going forward, you are completely safe to express your perspective. This is not a space where you will be attacked, and the person doing the attacking might be the one who gets removed. Tonight, you are safe to challenge yourself and to challenge other people on their thoughts and perspectives so that we as a collective can grow, right? And it is my job as the moderator and the facilitator to create that space where you are safe to speak. And the only thing I ask in return is that if I create this space in which you are allowed to express yourself, you allow your perspective to be challenged, right? This is not about you just getting some shit off your chest so everybody can look at you. That's my job. Cool? Sound good? Amazing. So given that tonight we have two other guest facilitators who will be joining us on this journey, Sir Arthur Kanai and Dr. Brian Martinez. Arthur is not a sir or a lord, but I just gave him that title anyway, and I'm pretty sure Brian is not a doctor, but I wanted them to sound very important. So I'll have them introduce themselves and they will tell you why they are or are not important, starting with Arthur.
Hey everybody, my name is Arthur Kanai. It's great to see a lot of familiar faces here. Hello everyone, happy birthday Scheherazade. I am a coach, I am a facilitator, I'm the co-founder of a nonprofit called the Atlas Project, and that's why I'm important. Thank you.
You're important for more reasons than just that, but yeah, go ahead, Brian Martinez.
Yeah, my name is Brian Martinez. I have a background mostly in tech, which is probably one of the most least diversified industries on the planet. And then I left tech my last thing was at Airbnb. I left tech a few months ago, 18 months ago now, and I've been a coach and trainer with the Atlas Project since then. So it's actually how Arthur and I know each other. But flying around the country, helping people shift their lives, and even there see like a lack of diversity. So excited to be here. Just leave it
Beautiful.
at that.
Absolutely fantastic. And for the people who don't know me, I'm switching to accents from time to time, so we'll all just have to deal with that. One of the reasons I wanted to bring Brian and Arthur specifically is, yeah, I want to have interesting conversation. Yeah, I want to have interesting questions. But I think that we live in a time, especially on the internet, where people are not very adept. People are not very learned in the experience of having conversation, right? So I wanted to bring on people who not just had, not necessarily opposing, but different views on a question, but people who could also facilitate a conversation, people who could also have a conversation without trying to make the other person wrong. And the intention is that me, Brian, and Arthur show an example of what it looks like to disagree with somebody and yet evolve at the same time tonight. Cool? So with all that rigmarole out of the way, tonight's question. I should have asked you to prepare like a drum roll for me, Christina. Next time we'll do it. Tonight's question is, can the fight to end racism, does the fight to end racism inadvertently create more racism? And I think that we can, for all sakes and purposes, we can also switch out the word racism for separateness, because for me, they're very aligned. But can the fight to end divisiveness, can the fight to end separation, does that actually in some ways create nuanced, more divisiveness, more separateness? Yeah. So as me, Arthur, and Brian jump into this chat, feel free to type text into the chat box your thoughts as we're going along, because we're going to be reading those and we're going to be speaking back onto them. And at times, if you have a really interesting perspective, we want to bring you into the chat. So we'll have you unmute yourself and you can pop into the conversation. Cool. So can the fight to end racism end up creating more racism? Let's start with Brian. I'm gonna let you take the stand first, because I know Arthur has a hot take. So I'm gonna start easy.
All right. So my view on this is it's just my view. I'm not going to apologize for it. I don't think that it's creating any more racism. I think America's been racist for a really long time, and that racism is just now in your face. So America's not getting more racist. It's just getting filmed. People are getting prosecuted for it. People are losing their jobs for it. So it seems like America's becoming more racist, but really it's just being televised. And it's being blasted on social media and stuff. Really, like the advent of social media, everybody having like a cell phone, being like a movie producer, basically, just by what they pull out of their pocket, it's really put a spotlight on it. So America's going to become more racist from this. I think that people are facing their own racism, and they have to decide which side of history they're going to be on. And because of social media, people have to publicly decide what side they want to be on. I think people have been secretly racist for a really long time. And the other thing I want to add to this is that as a Black man, I don't, one of my favorite movies is Back to the Future. I love that film. And I can't really think of a time period I would want to take it back to. That would be easier for me to achieve in America. So it's kind of hard for me to think about I think it's less racist today than it has been. And I don't think it's becoming more racist. I think that like there's a pendulum shift and we're just having to face instead of ignore it. Like we've been trying to ignore it for a few years now. So I'll stop there. I'll let Arthur drop a bomb.
Go ahead, Arthur.
Yeah, I don't think this is too controversial. And I think in a lot of ways, we might all be thinking it a little bit, but my simple answer to the question, can the fight to end racism create or cause more racism or separateness? Based on everything that I'm seeing, my simple answer is yes. And when I look at the definition of racism in the dictionary, it goes like this: prejudice, discrimination, or antagonism directed against a person or people on the basis of their membership or a particular racial or ethnic group. To preface, I am in support of Black Lives Matter. I think racism towards Black people in this country is by far, it's terrible, right? And I'm a part of a marginalized group or a minority. I am Asian. I deal with racism a lot, and it's nowhere near close to what I imagine Black people go through. And I only imagine because I can't know, right? I'm in a minority, but I never fear for my life. There's never a target on my back. And so I do want to preface, like, I am not here going like racism doesn't exist. Like that isn't true for me. But what I have seen, as you know, we saw George Floyd, and there's this whole movement and there's protests. There is a sense of toxicity for me that I am experiencing. And I think right now in this society, we live in a society that is very binary. It's this or that. It's right or wrong. And wherever I'm standing, that other person's wrong. And what I'm seeing right now is, I have seen with my own eyes, like really great people that happen to be white, and they're not explicitly racist, right? They're not MAGA wearing, like overweight, bearded, you know, Southern gun toting. I'm making stereotypes here, but they're not that. And are they implicitly racist? Sure, they can be. And I've seen this movement point a finger towards any white person as a racist. And any sort of defense from a white person is perceived as, it's very like simple, like, well, that's white fragility. You're defending yourself, you're using a microaggression, and it's really easy, and it's been kind of hard to watch. I've seen leaders that are white in my life being torn down for literally just being white. And I think the danger right now is, because our society is so binary, it's what I've seen is it's so easy to identify any white person that might not understand what is happening right now as the super right-wing militia, gun-toting, MAGA-wearing person. And that's just not true for me. I think there is a spectrum of human beings. We're all unique and different. And it has actually broken my heart watching this go down, because I've seen great people be torn apart and feel terrible. And I just don't think that's the way to cause or create sustainable change. I think there's a lot of us in the spectrum in the middle. And I think what probably works better is a conversation, is some empathy, is to say your experience and try to enroll the other person into your experience versus making them a suspect, making them an aggressor, making them a bad guy. And in my experience, when you make someone a bad guy, they stand harder in their stance of what they're actually thinking. And I think it does create more racism.
Boom. Thank you very much. You kind of had an unfair play because you whipped out the Webster's dictionary. I should have said you had no access to resources. This is kind of cheating. So your point is null and void, Arthur. Just kidding. I actually think that's a good point, because like over the last week or so, I feel like a lot of our attention has been brought onto statues and Confederate flags. And I think that as a Black guy, this is not the first time that I've seen this kind of narrative play out, where we were talking about racism and then we're like, oh yeah, the Confederate flag is racist. Now we're gonna bring all of our attention onto that. We're gonna topple down these statues. And for me, if, again, to make a generalization, if I'm some white guy in the South and I've hated Black people my entire life, seeing statues come down does not make me go, you know, I should stop being racist. You know, now that they brought down that Confederate flag, I'm really going to reconsider my views, right? That doesn't happen, right? So for me, at the root of racism is people with racist beliefs, right? So for me, that's the person that I want to have a conversation with. That's the person that I want to rewire the perspectives with. And I know that's just me. And I don't think that any person that looks like me is obligated to put themselves in that situation. I don't think any person that looks like me is obligated to have that conversation. And I don't think that we're going to move forward until those conversations happen. But I don't think the kind of symptomatic things that we're doing right now, which is taking down the flags and taking down the statues, which I don't personally care about. I don't care about a piece of rock, but symbolism for me actually only holds a little bit of weight, only holds a little bit of value. And while Brian was talking, something that landed for me was this idea of like cancer and this idea of chemotherapy, which is racism is the cancer. And a lot of times the only thing we know what to do is use chemotherapy. Cool. Chemotherapy is attacking the racism and it's creating more problems and is making us weaker as a society, in my opinion. That's how I feel like that's how we're approaching it right now. The things that we're doing is creating more divisiveness and more separateness. So Dr. Brian Martinez, what do you have to say to those?
Yeah, I think that, I mean, chemotherapy as an analogy is really painful, right? And I think that because we're swinging one way, it's going to be a painful process. I don't think it's right that like innocent people are being villainized in this process, but you're also taking a group of people that have been villainized for so long. Like how many people are in prison that were innocent, that like got the finger pointed at them that way? And so the pendulum's swinging the other way, where like those people who were like on the receiving end of racism for decades and decades and decades finally have an opportunity to like stand up and mobilize and fight back. And so it's like, it's like, a really sheltered child, someone who grew up really sheltered in a home, when they go to college, they kind of wild out a bit. It's like you've been pulling this rubber band back and back and back, and then you let it go and it snaps really fast, right? And they're experiencing and they're exploring everything in college. And their grades tend to suck the first quarter. That's a separate conversation, but like that's kind of what's happening right now. People are feeling like they can actually start to attack this. And like there's collateral damage in the process, just like there's collateral damage with chemotherapy. And like there's collateral damage on the existing system, right? But you have all these people that like the system, the way it was set up wasn't supporting them, right? The basic rules of society in America wasn't like giving them a fair shot. It wasn't letting them vote, right? It was putting a lot of them in prison. And so now they have this opportunity to finally shed a light on it and say like, hey, that's not right, and to start pointing people out. And so like if I use your example of like the Confederate flag or the person that supports the Confederate flag in South Carolina, do I think this is going to remove their racism? No, I don't think it's going to remove the racism that this person has, but it's making them actually address it and see it. They actually pause and look at it to be like, hey, is that racist? Just the fact that they're getting in a conversation right now, even though it's painful, I think it's going to create more solution. But I don't think it's creating more racism. The Confederate flag was always racist. People were just ignoring it. People who could ignore it were. But if I walk into a bar in Texas, what I've done before, and I see the Confederate flag, I don't have the option to ignore that. That's a racist symbol that's there. And so you're taking a bunch of privileged people and you're taking away their privilege to ignore it, which I think is what society needs, not just in America, but someone on here is from Australia, right? Was that Jen? They have their own history with this, with like Aboriginal people, and different countries have it. That you go to Italy and like how they treat people who come over from Senegal. Look at the Italian soccer team. There's like one player, and how's he treated? One black player, and how's he treated by that team? Like I think it's creating a space for all these countries to really start looking at what have we been ignoring, have been privileged enough to ignore, that we're not privileged enough to ignore anymore because it's in our face. So not more racism, just you have to face it. It's in your face. And I think at the end of the day, we'll come from like Blacks and Hispanics being subjugated right here, and you'll swing over to now, some privileged people are feeling like they're being attacked, and we'll end up somewhere in the middle, which we better off than the two extremes that we were at.
Cool, thank you, sir. Catherine in the chat says, the root of racism in this country is structural. Individuals can also be racist, but so are our systems, laws, education, prison pipeline, et cetera, et cetera. Arthur, do you have any thoughts on that or anything that Brian just said?
I think for me, this is going to be controversial. I think the last time that I remember that there was such a collective uproar was the Me Too movement. The Me Too movement was necessary. It had to happen. There were systems that were set up. Like, let's just it sucked, right, for women, especially in Hollywood and media, but everywhere, right? It wasn't okay. And then, as Brian was saying, the pendulum swung the other direction. And for me, when you look at the energetics of what was happening, it was a protest against, energetically, toxic masculinity, specifically from men, directed towards women. It was not okay. And what I ended up seeing as the pendulum swung was a movement that was highly charged with its own toxic masculinity. And it felt like largely, I'm painting with a broad brush, but it felt like largely toxic masculinity as an energy was adopted by the Me Too movement, and it went scorched earth, aiming at the other direction. And for me, that doesn't cause more. I think Harvey Weinstein's a really good example. You look at him, he is completely unapologetic. It didn't change his mind. And that's one example of the far extreme, but I just think a majority of the population is somewhere in the middle, right? If we're talking about the pendulum, we're somewhere in the middle. And I just don't think calling a white person that has questions about what is happening, labeling them a Nazi or a racist or pointing the finger of you are just like Hitler, solves a lot of problems. It probably just makes that individual a little more like dig their heels into their position because they're being accused. And if someone's going to be right at you, you just want to be right back. And I just don't think being on the other side of the pendulum, largely, I get that it needs to happen, but I don't think that it actually causes a lot of change for the mass majority who happens to be in the middle.
Beautiful. We have something from Connect. I don't think, is that your real name, Connect? Yeah, I love it. Amazing. Shout out to your parents. Connect has something really interesting to say. She says, I don't think anything was actually resolved by the Me Too movement, and I'm concerned we'll see the same result from Black Lives Matter. Connect, if you want, you can unmute yourself and throw some thoughts into the chat, because I think it's really interesting.
Okay. First of all, it's the name that I chose for myself, not my legal name. But
Well, shout out to you.
thank you. But yeah, going off of what Arthur said, and I think at large and in daily conversations with people, the Me Too movement sort of came about from a lot of conversations that individual people were having on an interpersonal level or in their small groups that they were comfortable with, groups with friends, or maybe they went to an event that was specifically for overcoming sexual assault, etc. And then I'm 29 years old right now, and I was 22 years old whenever I found out that cis men don't walk down the street and are afraid every day. And then I was embarrassed that I was 22 years old and a man was telling me this, that he didn't feel this way. And I was like, what do you mean? I didn't get it. And so even now, that was 7 years ago, and looking at where we are now, I think that kind of going into Arthur's next point with this pendulum swinging, I think we got to, in the Me Too movement, we got to this other side of the pendulum where people were finally taking action and coming back at it, but then there wasn't enough follow through on their daily interactions with people outside of their comfortable friend groups or outside of these safe spaces. And I understand why not, but I think that maybe the reason why not is because it wasn't actually victims and survivors of sexual assault that needed to be stepping up. It was their allies, and those people were not stepping up. And even now, I still argue with cis men about that, people who I thought were my friends, who tell me that, women are paid fairly, equal wages to men. And, they'll throw out these things and they'll just tell me that, these statistics that we know are true, they'll just tell me that they're not true. Oh no, everyone's treated equally. And so my concern is that those types of mentalities will bleed over into the Black Lives Matter movement, just like how they did the last time, because Black Lives Matter didn't just come out this year. This has been going on for a few years. And so I think that the first time, a couple years ago, there wasn't enough response out loud and in our quiet conversations in our communities a couple years ago when this started. And my concern is that right now we're still being loud, but what happens whenever we aren't being loud anymore? And what are the conversations that we're going to be having in our smaller groups and our intimate social circles? And so like one of the things that I'm doing personally this time is like, I'm sending mass texts to friends and I'm just like, what did you do about white supremacy today? Like, here are the things I did. And so like, that's how I'm taking action to be different. And I've gotten responses from friends where they're like, thank you for taking the initiative to send me this link and like this podcast and this book and blah, blah, blah. And so it's just like, yeah, but like, I'm not getting those messages from other friends of mine. It's like, I'm doing this and I'm doing my work, but like, I need everyone else to step up. And so I think part of it to make sure that this doesn't die off like Me Too is to, I don't know, somehow like inspire more people to take these smaller actions and to not become burnt out or annoyed, exhausted, etc. by the process.
Gotcha. Thank you, Connect. Appreciate you.
I'd like to
I'd like to respond to that.
Oh shit! All right, let's go. Go ahead, Brian.
Let's go.
I think that's an interesting analogy. Like when I think about how you can like break down a wall, like the Berlin Wall, you can like drive a steamroller through it, or a bunch of people can take out a bunch of chunks of it, and that tends to be how I see systems fall. You know, it's not a, you know, like Arab Spring, a bunch of people took a bunch of actions that changed it. And when I think about the Me Too movement, you didn't see it, you know, like a lot of government, you know, laws and stuff that went into place. But if you look at certain industries, you will see behavioral changes that happen. Like out of the Me Too movement, I saw, again, I came from tech, right? So I saw more women-founded venture capital firms growing, being able to get, you know, raise money and sustain their funds and get really good deals. I saw more female founders raising money and building great companies. I saw more women on founding teams. And when I hear conversations today, like I was on a call a few days ago, mostly men and 2 women, and a male called out the lack of women on the call. And I think that conversation probably wouldn't have happened, you know, 5 or 6 years ago, right? Just look at, you know, the TV show Silicon Valley. It wasn't, you know, to start a startup, you needed like 5 white guys and an Indian guy, you know, a bunch of money. And so if I take that industry as a proxy, what does that look like for people of color? You know, I think that you'll have similar, like more VC funds, more people on founding teams. You know, I'm an investor, and I saw recently that a company that's founded by a Black founder was raising a round at a $4 billion valuation. And I've never seen a valuation that high for a Black founded tech company. And a part of me feels like without COVID and without this like Black Lives Matter movement currently, that probably doesn't happen. People probably don't pay attention to it that way. They probably don't value it equally. And then when that person succeeds, what other opportunities does that create? And so, yeah, we might not see, you know, systematic law changes. Like they might not close down a bunch of private prisons and stuff as a result of this. But if DAs start looking at how they hand out, you know, jail time differently, if judges start looking at how they hand out jail time differently, if more Blacks can raise money for their startups, right, and have an equal shot at building a company, like an equal shot, then I think that does create progress over time. And from where I'm sitting, like not having Confederates on horses and on statues, and not having to walk into a bar with a Confederate flag, like that still feels like some progress, and we can just keep going. It doesn't have to be a big, you know, steamroll, because then that's what makes people fight. That's what launches civil wars, when you like try to steamroll something. But I agree with you that I want it to continue. Absolutely. And it feels like it is fizzling, and it's a scary thing. It's a real scary thing, because then those people who were alone are going to feel alone again. It feels like it was like an exciting thing to get involved with, and now they're letting it, you know, whatever like Netflix is putting out is more exciting, you know, than Black Lives Matter. Arthur? Go ahead, Arthur.
Yeah, I don't know if this is on topic, but I heard like, you know, some cisgender men feel unsafe, right, during the Me Too movement because of what was happening. And so I think this time around too, I've had enough conversations with white men that kind of go, that literally say, it's not a good time to be a white man right now, right? And they'll say that to me privately. God forbid they go on social media and share that. They will be torn apart and ripped up. And I have seen it. The result of that is that white man not feeling safe to share their opinions or to even question what's happening. And they feel like they're more right. See, I am unsafe. This is another form of racism. And all of a sudden they are consumed by their own experience, and it doesn't allow this person to see what is happening with Black Lives Matter. And so my only position here is like, we should, like, with this, we should not be attacking anyone just because they're white and labeling them, you know, some white militia dude. Like, that's just not what is, that's not what it is. We live in a spectrum, and we get to have a conversations. We get to listen to all colors, because let's be honest, what's happening is we get to listen to Black Lives Matter. We get to listen to white people too, because at the end of the day, this was caused by systemic racism that was caused by white people. And there needs to be a dialogue and a conversation without the attacking, without the vile, and without the, you know, kind of the toxicity that I feel like is everywhere. I can't even look on social media right now because people are getting killed for having a question, for having a thought that might be against the large status quo that is Black Lives Matter right now. I support Black Lives Matter. I support all people. I know that Black Lives Matter is like what we are talking about right now. And I do think that there is a better empathetic way to have that conversation without shaming white people. That, to me, perpetuates the problem.
Yeah, and I think you make a good point that I want to jump into there, Arthur, which is the process is iterative, right? Like right now, if we don't allow people who maybe have a difference of thought, or maybe who want to question some approaches in the movement, then we don't question our own processes. And as a result, our process might not be as effective as it could be, right? Like when we don't allow people to have different opinions, when we don't allow people to question the validity of the things that we're doing, or challenge us with different fucking statistics, then all of a sudden we lose the maximum potential that we could create for change. So for me, as a Black guy, right, my intention is for us to shift this thing, right? Is for us to shift the culture, and as quickly as possible, right? And I think in order to expedite that process, it is necessary to hear the opinions of the people who maybe have something to say in opposition to Black Lives Matter. We're not even in opposition, but just who have an opinion on it, right? And I think what Arthur is saying is so valid right now, because as soon as you have any questioning, as soon as you have a narrative, especially on social media, that is in any way not squeaky clean, you're shut down, right? And what I want the people who are doing the shutting down to realize is that you are actually counterproductive to your entire mission by doing that. Yeah.
I
ahead,
agree with you, and I think, and I want to go back to Connect's point, and something that came alive for me while I was just talking about what was going on in venture capital and startups with women is I stumble in explaining that because sometimes I don't know, where do I use the word female, where do I use the word women funded, like where do I use my effort to be, let me not say you guys, because not everyone is you guys, like how far I've had to go and how uncomfortable that's been as a male trying to be inclusive in that and not step on my own words. And I can empathize with, you know, with white men and women. Again, I'm stumbling again what I call them, white people. Like I can see them also struggling with like, I don't want to say anything crazy because everyone's like walking on eggshells right now, right? And I don't, like to your point, Imari, like I don't think that supports, right? Because you want people to be able to express, and you want for there to be some empathy towards those people as they figure it out. There wasn't a lot of empathy for men as we were trying to figure this out with the Me Too movement, and there's not a lot of empathy for white people as they're trying to figure this out with people of color. And at the same time, I get it, because there wasn't a lot of empathy for 6 people not being able to vote because they have felonies in Florida. There wasn't a lot of empathy, you know, for Ahmaud Arbery until there was, you know, an up about it. People weren't getting arrested. And so I get like, we're people on this call, like we do all this transformer and we meditate and we do yoga and stuff, and we're so grounded. And so we're like, hey, we want to approach this from a responsible manner. And most people who are involved in this movement hasn't. And so I think it's really important to also like empathize and see where they're coming from. They have not benefited from that empathy. And one of the biggest things that triggers me is when people are like, yeah, you guys should peacefully protest. You're not peacefully arresting people. You're not peacefully breaking up families, right? You're not peacefully denying this person a job on the basis of like their name, right? That's not peaceful, but we're expecting like the people who are, you know, like do it the Martin Luther King way, like he got killed too. They weren't peaceful in that. And so it's hard for me sometimes to go tell people like really hyped up about this, hey, like let's come about it a different way. Let's not be on the attack, because like they have felt attacked, you know? And so I'm not expressing an opinion on it. I'm just saying like, I want to white people who are being attacked right now, but I also have a ton of empathy for the people who have been attacked for so long and lashing out the way they might be.
Beautiful. Thanks, mate. Sherazad, I know it's your birthday. I want to have you unmute yourself, because I think the question that you asked about calling forward Blacks is super interesting. So if you want to jump into that, and I want to hear what the guys have to say.
Thank you. And I was just curious about, I mean, I don't have too many white friends, and I'm in Los Angeles, and I have more people of color friends than white friends, and we get really honest. And what I've noticed come up in my life is a lot of pro Black Lives Matter, but while that's being said, there's also this energy of like, well, if you're white, you know, like it's an anti-white energy, and it doesn't feel good. And so I was curious how to bring that up with people of color, and I've done it as well, and say, well, hey, that's not fair. We're like not saying all lives matter, because I get the point, but at the same time, it's like we're not promoting a negative energy here. And so I get confused on how to navigate around a difficult conversation with people of color.
I love that you bring that up, because I think in my own experience as a Black guy, I'll have Black friends and they'll say some like wild shit about white people, and I'm like, I don't know how I feel about that, but they're like, oh, well, you know, Black Lives Matter, and it like kind of, so then it erases everything that they just said, and I'm like, that's actually, I feel like there's a discrepancy there. I think that being pro Black Lives Matter doesn't give you an excuse to hate white people. It doesn't give you an excuse to attack white people, right? Brian, I want to hear what you have to say about that.
I'm glad you put it on me. Thank you.
You're welcome.
That's a great question, Sherazad. And the only thing I would encourage you to do is have the conversation. Like, I have a good Black friend of mine he's Black and Filipino like I am, and he's a Trump supporter. And that's a conversation I get to have. I had a conversation on Friday with a DA who's a Black DA in LA who's really hard on crime, regardless of the race. And it's, you know, these are tough conversations when the Black Lives Matter movement is happening, and it's about like being lighter on crime, but she has a different perspective. She sees like come in, she sees them like use the system, you know, and use race to get away with stuff and then go commit other crimes, right? And so part of it is like really sitting with like why they feel the way that they feel. But I also think, to Imari's point, is like when you see racism, let me think about how I want to say this. On one hand, like, does anybody else like Dave Chappelle? He's like one of the most racist comedians, and he says stuff about white people all the time, and it's funny, but I think his intention isn't that he's racist. He just like is calling out the differences. And so I think that there's a way to like not to attack a person when you hear something, but a way to like lighten it and say, hey, let's have a discussion around this that's like constructive and lighthearted, and it can even be funny while we talk about it. But I get the challenge because I'm sitting in it too. Like, I mean, the best advice I have is like, just sit in the discomfort with them and have the conversation. And you actually get to, if you want them to be open, you have to be open too. So I had to be open to like, what is your hard on crime stance, and like to try to understand why that person and empathize why they feel the way that they feel, even though everything I'm reading is the opposite. And everything I feel and my friends that I grew up with in prison, like all that experience makes me feel the opposite. I have to like be open. Does that support you at all, Sherazad? Okay.
You got a thumbs up. Arthur, what you got to say, man?
I think much like how we root for our own country during the Olympics, or we might root for someone from our hometown, we identify with what we're familiar with, right? And so what's refreshing right now with Black Lives Matter movement, it feels like everyone's getting involved. And something that I've been frustrated with, I think largely Asians in this country stay under the radar, right? We're not a part of these conversations, and I'm frustrated. I'm like, well, where are all the Asians at, right? We live in a country, we are mostly immigrants, and we have, based on the data and the numbers, thrived in a country that was unfairly, unlawfully, just really in a fucked up way built by Black people, and we have benefited from it. We know what it feels like to be marginalized, and we're not saying anything about it. When COVID started, right, I saw videos of, for some reason, there were like a lot of old Asian women getting beat up in the streets publicly, and there was a lot of racism. I heard the Asians then, and I think it's human nature to identify with what we are familiar with. And so as an Asian, it's easier to speak up about racism towards Asians when it's, like I'll be honest, I didn't hear a lot of Black people talking about racism against Asians at that point. And right now, right, Black Lives Matter, Asians are silent. And so I think for me, Scheherazade, the answer would be, it's empathy. Even when your friend, who is a person of color, is being racist towards white people, towards white people, Black people, being racist towards Black people, like, understand where they are coming from. There aren't common denominators. They're more empathetic towards their own cause and understanding that and entering the conversation that way. I feel like it would be a powerful movement if all humans stood against all racism, period. And when we start making it about a color, then there is right and wrong, and there is fighting, there's making people wrong, shaming and guilting. And it's like, I wish my Asian brothers and sisters would stand up as much as Black people are right now regarding Black Lives Matter, but they're not. And I understand that too. And I think when the focus becomes about the subject, which is racism, versus like the different camps, and we can enroll all groups to stand up against the same thing, then it feels like that would be a more sustainable movement.
Excellent. Cheers, mate. Thank you for that. Tyler made an interesting comment in the chat a couple minutes ago. And she says that Black people can't be racist, or people of color can't be racist. Tyler, you want to unmute yourself and throw some thoughts in the chat? Because I think that is a massively fascinating conversation.
Yeah, so from what I've learned, when we talk about racism, what we're actually talking about is discrimination or bias plus power. So you can have discrimination or bias toward a group of people, but if you don't have power to hold them down, it's not racism. So when we say like Black people are racist towards white people, that's actually a mischaracterization of what's happening, because there's no systemic power that Black people hold that can do harm to white communities. So I think it's really important to clarify these terms as we're using them, because the thing that gets thrown into these conversations all the time is like, yeah, but Black people are racist too. And if we can't differentiate between bias plus power and just plain old bias, we're actually missing the point of the conversation. It doesn't matter if one group of people doesn't like the other, unless one group has more power than the other and can be in a position to oppress them.
I think that's an interesting point. I like to play the devil's advocate. So imagine we're at an event or like a start, or actually I'll speak from personal experience. I remember at one point I was doing like a dance workshop with a couple other folks, right? And they were like, most people here are familiar with the ecstatic dance modality. And it's usually like a pretty white modality, right? So like it's a dance that like a lot of white people do. So a couple of friends of mine, they're like, oh, we want to create like a POC focused ecstatic dance. We want to create a workshop for people of color, right? And I'm like, all right, cool. You know, I love seeing Black people dance. We kill it. It's amazing. It's fantastic. And then we started selling the tickets. And one of the people on the board was like, oh, like, I don't really want to have white people there, right? So in that moment, given your definition, they have the power to make a decision. So in that moment, aren't they racist?
I mean, I think if you want to come at it and talk about like that microcosm, sure, in that microcosm, it can be seen as racist. It could also be seen as like wanting to, Shelly's putting something in about they are not racist in the chat. But I'm saying it can also be seen as wanting to actually create and hold a safe and sacred space for Black people, for people of color to be able to engage, which without the presence of the oppressor in their space. So I think like we can go back and forth about that, but when we're looking at the macro of the system, that the power piece is very important.
Gotcha.
I think
Arthur,
it's
go ahead, Brian.
yeah, I think it's an interesting thought because I don't think that all like we like Black people or people of color BIP, is it BIPOC?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Black Indigenous people of color.
Yeah, I just don't know if it's like yeah. I'll just say BIPOC.
Okay.
There's another example of like me stumbling. Yeah. No. All right. So, but that's an example of like, shit, do I have to be politically correct? Probably not. Anyway, I'm with Imari on this, and it's so funny because like I asked two people, two Black guys on a call. I probably have experienced Black people being racist. I feel like I've experienced it with, I grew up in South LA, and like Hispanic versus Black tension was really high when I grew up. Like there were race riots all the time, like there were drug wars between the two. And so I felt like that was like a really race fueled thing, and they were racist towards each other. Neither of them were coming from a place of power, right? But they were incredibly racist towards each other. And then I also think that Blacks probably lack systemic power, but there are Black people in power, right? And to the extent that like I hold a power position when I'm interviewing people, I can be racist in my hiring practices. Either way, I could like rehire. I could not want to look like the Black manager that hires other Black people because they're Black, so then I hire all white and Asian people, or I can look like the Black manager that is like trying to play the the race card and hire just Black people and say like my Black unit's going to crush your unit and get all competitive about it. Like there's different ways I can approach it. But I feel like when I've been in positions of power, I've definitely had the opportunity to be racist. I can just mask it as being inclusionary, or inclusive.
I love what Shelly said in the chat, which is that racism is societal power. We're not talking about in defined spaces. We're looking at society as a whole. So I'm wondering, like, in what you're saying, Brian, what's the difference between being racist and being discriminatory? Because it sounds like you're discriminating against certain people. And I'm like, so what would be the benefit of using the term racist as opposed to just being in the discrimination piece?
Is it just the term, or is that we're concerned about, or is it the actions?
Well, the term holds weight because when we're in these conversations and someone who doesn't actually want to deal with the issue says, well, Black people can be just as racist as white people, as a way to actually avoid the conversation and not be in the issue, it's really important to distinguish, no, they can't, because racism is about systemic power. It's about societal power. If we look like over the course of all of these generations and the impact of your discrimination because you have power, that's what we're talking about when we talk about racism. Discrimination on a case-by-case basis is a different thing.
And I'll just put in that I think the distinction too is that, and that's different now about the conversations that arose out of Ferguson and all of that, is we are talking about white supremacy specifically and its effects in America. And that I find a really clarifying way to be able to focus in on what's happening and get out of the pointing at the racism and getting in the semantics of it, because the plague in America is white supremacy.
Got it. So
Cool.
what I'm hearing you say is that in America, because whites are in power, racism tends to apply towards white supremacy. But in China, it would be, you know, Chinese supremacy, and India, it would be caste supremacy that will be defined as racist in those areas.
Yeah, those would be the dismantle. My stand is like those are the racial power structures to dismantle in service of being a community that has integrity, that has responsibility, all of these sorts of pillars that we're familiar with as a community.
I would love to hear from Shelley, because she is putting in things in there that I'm curious about.
Go ahead, Shelley, jump in. Let's hear what you got to say. Or does Shelley only want to remain anonymous? One thing while Shelley comes onto the chat, and I think Connect is kind of mentioning this right now, and it's something that's super fascinating to me as like a coach, is this idea of how do we all interpret words, right? Because Tyler, it sounds like you have a very clear idea of what racism means to you, right? And yet, you know, Arthur started with his definition of what racism means to according to Merriam-Webster's dictionary, right? I think we run a dangerous line when we assume or we project our own interpretations of what a word means onto somebody else, and they have to then live and abide by our interpretations of the word, right? Not saying that anybody's right or anybody's wrong, but I think what you did is super powerful, Tyler, would say, this is how I interpret this word. And based on how you interpret the word, I'm like, fuck yeah, completely 100% agree, right? So Arthur, if you don't mind, because you already brought your Webster dictionary with us, can you read what the dictionary definition that you read earlier was?
Prejudice, discrimination, and antagonism directed against a person or people on the basis of their membership or particular racial or ethnic group. Typically, and this is where Tyler's definition comes in, typically one that is a minority or marginalized.
Gotcha. Any thoughts on that, Tyler?
I'm sorry, I was in the chat.
Just a quick question. Okay. So I'm hearing from what Tyler's saying and what Shelley's contributing, racism is targeted towards marginalized people, and the distinction of, let's just say, a Black person attacking a white person for being white, that is discrimination. That is not racism. That is discrimination, and there's a difference between the two.
Exactly.
Clear.
And so, see, for me, sorry, Tyler. For me, what's frustrating about that is the whole thing is fucked up. The whole thing to me is ineffective, right? I don't care if we call it discrimination. I don't care if we call it racism. Separateness is not taking us to where we want to go. That's the way I view it, right? So a lot of times what gets me frustrated in these conversations is when we say, oh, well, you know, Black people can't be racist. All of a sudden, it's a get out of jail free card to all my Black friends to say racist shit. I'm like, bro, this is not helping. I personally, for me, only speaking as myself, I'm not as interested in like the politics of it. For me, I'm interested in there is an inherent cancer in our society, which is this idea of separateness, which is this idea of I am better than you, regardless of your skin color, whether you're poor, whether it's because you're from this area. And for me, that's the frustration.
I agree with you, Imari. I agree with you. But one thing I do want to call out, like my experience is the same way. Like I can experience Black people as being racist personally. Like that's how I feel when I see some of the stuff they do. Now, like what you're also pointing out is like, can people use terms to dismiss other people's views? It's so easy to dismiss and be like, that person's racist, that's crazy. I don't want to face it. I don't want to deal with it. So I can just label them as this, and I don't want to worry about it. And I feel this way when I talk to other Black people today about Black on Black crime. Right? Because like my whole training says, coming from a place of responsibility, it sucks that Blacks are being killed by cops. And I think about how many Blacks are being killed by Black people. I feel like it would be a big difference to our community if we just decided to stop killing each other. That actually might be a bigger number. It might result in like more Blacks having kids, less Blacks being in prison, if we just as a community decided to make that change. And I don't feel like I have permission to talk about that, because when I say that, it gets dismissed. It says like, oh, you're just like the white people who are dismissing, like you're trying to take the attention off of, you know, police brutality. I'm not, but there's this other big problem I would also like to solve while we're addressing police brutality. So when terms become dismissive like that, I mean, that's where it really triggers me. I feel triggered right now, but So I can see where Imari's coming from, because like as we have conversations with people, I feel like we get dismissed when we try to counter also people who look like
Right.
that.
And I think the through line that I'm seeing in all these conversations that we're having is that it's going to sound corny. It's going to sound like a cliche motivational poster. But at the end of the day, it's like every single person has something interesting and unique and a diverse, different perspective to add to this conversation. And as soon as we start saying like, oh no, your opinion isn't valid because of the way you look, or oh no, your opinion isn't valid because of your position of power, we as a collective are suffering. That's how I'm interpreting this through line here. Tyler, do you have anything to say?
Yeah, I think the thing that I would put in is that the way I hold the distinction between racism and discrimination is based on like a large body of scholarly work that's addressing like the big scope of the picture. So Brian, what you were saying about Black on Black crime, and like, yes, let's talk about that. Let's solve that. And that wouldn't be nearly as much of an issue if it weren't for the hundreds of years of disempowerment and disenfranchisement that comes through power, which is why it's important to be able to differentiate racism from just plain old hate. And Imari, I also want to say that I totally agree with you that like in some circles, in some communities, it's not necessarily important to differentiate between racism and discrimination. I have found, however, that in conversations with white people, especially, it's super important to create that difference so that people can understand the impact that hate has when it's coupled with power over many, many generations.
Yes, 100% agree. Like what you're talking about, that formula of hate plus power, that's what's created the world that we live in today. And I completely 100% align with you that power is an essential, that's what created what we're in today, right? If people who all hated didn't have power, then the world would look different than it is today. And I think that there is this core element though of the hate, and that for me, I'm like, if we took away everybody's power, we'd all be screwed. But if we took away everybody's hate, I think we'd actually kind of be better off. Yeah. Arthur, go ahead.
I'm just curious because what I heard Brian say was he was talking about personal responsibility, and I also heard like his discomfort in sharing that. And then I heard Tyler really like expand on that eloquently. And I'm curious from Tyler, do you see a place for personal responsibility, as Brian was saying, in this conversation, or no?
100%. I think that the only way forward in this conversation is personal responsibility, and that to be responsible, we are required to understand what we're talking about.
Beautiful. And I think this is juicy. Thank you guys so much for this conversation.
Yeah, it's just replying to the comment in the chat. I think it's important. It's not like I'm saying Black on Black crime isn't systematic and as a result, but I'm also not going to disempower my people by saying we don't have power to do something about
to
it.
shift it and change it, right? Because
Right.
then we come back to this idea of what Brian's talking about, which I think is really cool. As you know, fellow coaches, people in the transformational space, one of the fundamental tenements of that transformation is ownership, is accountability, right? And I think that even as me as a Black person, if I'm waiting on white guilt to change and shape the world, I'll be waiting a really long time and I'm gonna die before something gets changed, right? I think that at times I thoroughly enjoy being Black because there's some things that I can say that other people can't, because I feel like a white person can't say, yo, it's also on Black people to get our shit together. It's also on Black people to play a part in this journey that we're running. And if I was white, that would be a problem for me to say.
I have a question to the collective, because I think what we're talking about, it would be unpopular to mention, let's just say on my social media. If I wrote, or if anyone wrote right now, Black people need to get their shit together and they need to take personal responsibility for the crime they're committing, it's controversial. We can't really talk about that. And I would be curious to hear someone, if anyone on this call right now feels charged or feels some way about this specific conversation, I'd love to hear your point of view, because like writing something like that right now on social media would be detrimental to whoever wrote it. And so what are your thoughts on it when you hear that? is it controversial to you?
Well, there's the assumption, hi, Jillian. You know, there's the assumption there, hi, that Black people are not getting their shit together. And it's taking a closer look at what are the obstacles, what's in the way of Black people really being able to create change in their communities. And it just comes back to the discussion around power and the systemic changes that need to happen. We need resources in the community. We need activities. These kids don't have playgrounds, they don't have after school sports, they don't have, I mean, if you go in and you talk to kids in the community about what their community is lacking, what they don't have in their schools, you know, science and technology, there's just so many things that communities can do that they are not able to do right now for lack of resources. And that's also part of the discussion around the police department. It's like we're spending millions and millions and millions of dollars funding the police and not any money investing in the community. And it's just creating this cycle of crime because if people don't have hope and they don't have access to any resources to do anything that gives their life meaning and joy and purpose and motivation. And obviously I'm being very general here. This is not all Black communities, but these are the kinds of things that we see taking place. And there was one other thing that I just wanted to address really quickly because someone had put in the chat around the slavery and that there's always been slavery. And I just wanted to reflect something because this is something else that we often hear people say in these conversations is that the slavery of Africans brought to this country and enslaved for, you know, almost 400 years was one of the most brutal periods of slavery ever in history. And part of that reason is because it was the first time where people were actually, they had their humanity stripped from them. Not just their language, their religion, their families, and everything they knew about themselves, their entire culture, but their actual humanity. In this country, Black people were considered not even a man, 3/5 of a man, not even a human being. So that's what we're dealing with when we start to really look at, well, like breaking down white supremacist ideology. It stems from you not even being seen as human. And that's a really important part, as Tyler was saying earlier, like it's education and it's people actually understanding as we're going through these conversations, which are undoubtedly messy and people are at different levels of understanding. And that's why it's so beautiful that we're coming together and we're talking about this now. Anyway, I just wanted to add that.
Thank you very much for adding it. I definitely resonate with that. I want to hear what Brian and Arthur have to say on it before I share my thoughts.
You know, it's challenging for me because I get it. Like I get that it's systematic. I get like everyone on this call is so educated and read so many books about it and we understand the terms and like there's a bunch of stuff that's holding us down. And I have this experience of growing up in the hood for 18 years and like seeing the stuff that I saw, like seeing the fight, seeing how it was fun for the kids. Like the kids weren't thinking about systematic racism and like all these terms and stuff. They were just beating up people and robbing them for fun. And like, yeah, there's a lack of leadership. There's a lack of mentorship. Maybe no one's stepping up to stop them. But it's just hard for me, especially being like one of the guys who made it out. Like, you know how much personal responsibility I had to take to get out, or how fucking hard it was to get out. And so like, and I like to believe that every single person has that ability to try. Most people just get sucked up into the system. So it's not like I'm disagreeing with you that there's a system, but I also see the people that are in the system. And it's like, I hear on one hand, I'm like, yeah, they need jobs. And I see it, and I grew up around a bunch of them who never wanted to get a job, who never wanted to leave the projects, who like never, and it's tough for me, you know, and it's like you know, like families who just like live in the projects, you know, generation after generation. Some of it's just like a lot of it's systematic, and some of it's also like they don't aspire, right? And some of them like, and it's just my experience. I'm not saying like all of them are like this, but it's a frustrating thing for me sometimes, because like if I go back and I want to teach personal responsibility, like they still got a race. I guess what's challenging for me sometimes is to see people who like don't even try to run the race because of the system that's weighing on them.
Well, and I don't even know if it's that, if it's about the system weighing on them, if they're that present to it. Because if you think back when the slaves were first freed, do you know how many slaves actually left their plantations after they were freed? 1 in 100. That they stayed there because that's what they knew. And I think there's something to that logic. If you look at, I mean, like, man, when I first moved to New York, I couldn't believe there were people in Brooklyn who had never been into Manhattan. Like, how do you live in Brooklyn and you've never been into the city where everything cool exists ever? So there's something to that logic around what keeps people stuck. And I 100% agree with you that at the end of the day, this is about personal responsibility. We are all responsible and we all are at choice for whatever we do in life. Like, that doesn't change.
Right. I love that, Jillian. And it's basically what we're getting to with the whole concept for me of the show, which is that both what Brian is saying and both what you're saying, Jillian, can operate. We both of those realities can be in existence, right? Like, one doesn't have to cancel out the other. We can change the system and we can change it and we can deliver the tools. And there's an accountability of the shifting of the culture that is the personal responsibility. Because it's exactly what you said, Jillian. It's like, cool, you can free 100 people and then most of them are still going to stay on the plantation, right? And that's the inner work. So for me, I think that's why conversations like, how do we bring mental health and how do we bring personal development and transformation into communities of color so that, yeah, when we change the system, we actually change along with the system. Yeah. Thank you, Jillian. Wonderful point. Dr. Arthur Kanai, you have any thoughts? No? Wonderful. Tyler,
can I just add one more thing? And just to Julian's point, like when I talk about personal responsibility, like I just want to put the onus on like people who are in like still really impressed by the system. Like when I think responsibility, I'm talking about people like me who made it out, who did well, and like, what the fuck am I doing to help? Like, have I gone back? Like, I'm definitely not the modern day Harriet Tubman in terms of going back to get people out. That's not how I show up to my community. And like, and all my friends who are in tech, like most of them, I'm not gonna say all of them, but most of them aren't doing that either. And that's also not helping. And so I when I say personal responsibility, I mean it overarching, like it's me too.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. Ken, did you just unmute yourself on purpose?
Oh, I've been unmuted for a while. Sorry about that.
It's okay. Tyler, did you have something to say?
I think Adam does.
I did. Yeah, Brian, you hit on what I was thinking about over here, which is that the expanded conversation we're in is about personal responsibility for white people being responsible for white supremacy. So I don't think the argument is like, oh, it's not an either or, right? And the thing that has been missing in this country is personal responsibility for the supremacy that I benefit from every single breath I take. And so when we get into this space, like where I sit in my privilege means that that's the place that I get to speak from, and that the power that I have in my voice means that I get to hold myself high to actually have integrity, to actually have responsibility. Complete.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Arthur, what's on your mind?
In the theme of personal responsibility, what I'm in this moment thinking and celebrating and grateful for, that this whole movement that we are experiencing right now is personal responsibility. Whether you're Black or you're white, it's happening right now. So I'm grateful for that.
Yeah, and I think that's what you're talking about. It just landed an idea in my head, which is this idea of like the fact that you're on this call for me is personal responsibility, right? Like I see more white people on this call than I see Black people, right? So if we're talking about this idea of like, cool, how does a white person like Adam be more informed and be more potent in his fight against white supremacy? It is having these kind of conversations, right? Because there's also people who look like you who are like, oh, I don't want to sit through an hour and a half talking about race. And I get it, right? And we all get to do something uncomfortable to push the conversation forward, right? Those are my thoughts. Does anybody else have anything they want to say? Because I'm thoroughly enjoying the conversation where it's at right now. Shrazade, Jen, Britt.
I will.
Oh, who's that?
Someone's sharing and you should go.
Okay, this is Sylvia.
Hello, Sylvia.
Okay, I want to share something. I've been standing for the movement, and it was something that really broke my heart, because I was talking with some Latin people about the movement, about the Black Lives Matter, and they asked me, "What are you doing for us?" And I said, "What do you mean?" "Okay, we suffer racism as well. Have you ever thought about that?" And I was, "Yes, you are completely right." And this movement is helping other races, to fight for our rights as well. So I wanted to share that this movement is not only for Blacks, it's also for all of us immigrants, that we have been suffering from racism from white people, sometimes here in United States.
I'm glad you said that, Sylvia, and because there does seem, Arthur and I've been on the receiving end of some Black versus Hispanics tension around this. So I'm glad you say that. Like we're not like Black Lives Matter doesn't say all lives don't matter, and it is a movement for everyone. And like when I've been out there like on the front lines, I do see a lot of Hispanics, the Latinx out there. I see a lot of white people out there. I don't see a lot of Asian people, to Arthur's point earlier. I think that's like the more interesting part of this, because when COVID started, I had friends who were like, people were looking at me weird when I cough. And I kind of laughed. I was like, that's so funny, because they look at me weird when I just like get on an airplane in first class or something like that. Like normal. So like this happens to me all the time. It's like, welcome to America. Like, hello, welcome to the party. This is what every other person who's non-white has been trying to tell you. And like Arthur said, like it still kind of feels like they haven't shown up. But I do feel like, white people and Hispanic people have shown up for Black Lives Matter, in droves.
Cool. One last thing I want to pull from the chat. Alyssa just said, white people need to get in their community for real. Like if you live in Bed-Stuy now, say what's up to your neighbor and have a convo. I think that's super interesting, because a couple of weeks ago, when tensions were really high and all the stores are getting boarded up or whatever, I remember I was like pulled over in my car, and I was like outside my car. I don't know what I was doing, but I was waiting for something. And this white lady pulls over next to me, and she like looks up at this storefront that had like Black Lives Matter written all over it, and she like took a picture of it, and presumably to post it on Instagram. And I was like, that's great, and like I'm right here, like we can talk right here, like in your face, you know what I mean? And I think that's interesting, because I feel like a lot of this hoopla and a lot of this momentum and a lot of this energy is going towards like, look, the movement is happening. Look, I'm part of the movement. And yet the uncomfortable part of like, instead of just taking a picture of the Black Lives Matter sign and just turning to your left and being like, hey, Black man, what's up? Let's have a conversation. That was actually the difficult part, right? And for me, that's where the progress is made. So thank you, Alyssa, for making that thought. Talk to the people you're uncomfortable having a conversation with. That's my takeaway on that. Anybody else have any other thoughts? Brian, Arthur, anything you want to lean into the conversation?
I'm curious if there's anyone on the call who is white, who has been on the receiving end of energy in the last 3 or 4 weeks, that have felt villainized or felt a certain way because of all of this. Kind of what I was mentioning earlier in the call, because I've seen it, and I would love an opportunity for someone to share what it's like on that side too, without feeling judged.
I mean,
so I see Jenna and Daniel, Adam, a couple people. Any of y'all can go ahead and speak into that.
And I'd love to specify like what happened and how did that make you feel? Like what was the result of what happened?
Can I jump in real quick? So it's a very, very small, like, it seems tiny in comparison, but like I've had a few people who are like, you're not saying enough, you're not doing enough for this movement. And it makes me so annoyed, because like where I live, so in Australia, there is a huge Indigenous community. And for a few years, I actually lived in the Northern Territory, which is got the highest population of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders in Australia. And it wasn't until I actually lived there, and I have lived in this community, and I have so much love for everything that our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders give to us. And the people who are saying to me on social media, like, you're not posting about it enough, you're not sharing about it enough. It's like, like, it makes me really angry, because it's like, yes, but you're like they're the same people who have said to me, oh, I'm too scared to go to Darwin because I'm worried about what's going to happen to my safety. And it's like, nothing's going to happen to you. And they're the same people that are like jumping on the bandwagon of like making me feel like shit, because just because on social media I'm not posting about it must mean I don't give a shit. And oh, it makes me so furious.
Guilt posting, I love it. And by I love it, I mean I hate it. Jenna, what do you have to say?
For me, it's actually been a really fascinating roller coaster of emotion and thought and learning. I actually have a friend who is a policewoman. She teaches. She's like one of the trainers and everything. She's a dog policewoman, and I was posting all of this stuff because it really affected me. I can't go out and protest. I have a weakened immune system. So it's been a really interesting, so I've also had like self-guilt kick in for when I'm not out there on the streets doing things, making differences. I'm having conversations, but it doesn't feel like enough. And then on top of that, earlier on, I had posted something by Nicole Byer that was, to me, like, she's an amazing comedian. I freaking love her. And it was comedic, but also pointed to something that was her experience growing up. And part of it, one of the lines in there was that there are no good cops. And it was an eye-opening for me to look at what I was doing and how I was doing it, how I was reposting things, what I really cared about. Because my friend who's on the police force, she reached out and she was like, no good cops. It's great to see you saying that. And I was like, oh yeah, you know, and to have that recognition of like, okay, this is my experience. This is what I'm seeing. This is what I'm learning. Oh, but guess what? There's two sides to this coin, because I know for a fact that she teaches, like, she was like, do you think that I would be a part of something like that? I would stay at this, she's in Colorado. She's like, I would stay in this group of people if I felt that it was corrupt or, you know, XYZ down the line. And it really made me take a step back and give more research to, okay, what does it actually mean to defund the police? What does it actually mean to say there's no good cops? What is, you know, to see that the biggest thing is that we're lumping people into these categories and saying, like, I think it was Brian that mentioned earlier that there's the dichotomy, you're either one or the other. You can't learn and grow and strengthen love for one another, you know. I feel like I'm babbling.
You're good. Thank you, Jenna. I appreciate you.
Yeah.
What I'm hearing both from what you and Jen are saying is this idea of like how social media plays into it. And as like a white person, are you performing as a good token white person on social media, which I think is whack as hell. I think it's completely counterproductive, and I think it's completely inauthentic. And for me, anything that comes from inauthenticity will eventually be ineffective. Daniel Crosser, you said you also had an experience?
Yeah, I can't really put my finger on an exact flashpoint of how it was happening in the other person. I just know that there was a conversation that I had with a coworker, someone that I'm co-partnering with. And there was a conversation where she revealed to me after the fact, she's like, you know, Daniel, when we went into that conversation, I was already predetermined to disagree with whatever you're going to say. I'm like, okay, cool. Thanks for letting me know after the fact. And I don't know exactly what motivated her to get to that place, but we've since smoothed things out. We're working really well together, but there was something in there around her projection of my white male privilege, I think, that had her just dig in her heels no matter what I was going to say. And that's a tricky place to be in because it really stalls out the conversation from my perspective.
I love that so much. Arthur, do you have anything to say on those three stories, those three flashes?
Not really. It's just I think for me, I love to hear all sides, and you know, my heart has been broken in this process by so many things, and one of them is how certain people that I know and love that are very good people that you live their life as a vessel for good on this planet for everyone have been torn down and attacked just because they're white or they're not posting or they're not saying enough. And I'm not saying that it's right or wrong. It's just something that I've seen and it's broken my heart. And it's nice for me to hear the perspective of it coming from someone who might have experienced that. And you know, my hope, really, if we stick to the pendulum, like I'd love it to get into it's instead of just swinging one side to the other, like, man, we all live in the spectrum and we all get to have a voice. And this whole thing seems to me gets solved when we're all participating and we all fix it together.
Mr. Martinez, do you have anything to say, brother?
Not really. I feel like I've said a lot. I don't feel like I don't feel a need to put a bow on this. I think it's just been an awesome opportunity to speak up about this, and I think it's important that we have uncomfortable conversations like this where we can disagree. And I think that one thing that I'll really take away from it is, you know, if I haven't something, like also looking for evidence of the opposite.
Yeah. Can you say that one more time?
If I have a strong opinion about something, also looking for evidence of the opposite.
I kind of heard you the first time, but I just wanted you to say that because it's fucking amazing.
Yeah, I just pulled it out of my ass, but like that's how I felt.
It was fantastic. Yeah, your ass is full of great stuff, man. It's amazing.
Thank you.
Arthur, do you have anything? I like what Brian's doing as far as like any wrapping thoughts from the conversation, any main takeaways before I hand it over to Christina?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for me that I'm excited to explore more is I was not clear on the distinction between racism and discrimination. And I didn't know that racism was attached to like system and oppressor to marginalized groups. And like, thank you for that distinction. I've learned a lot from that. And I am definitely clearer now on how I use that. And also this whole conversation reinforces for me when we all have something to offer and we're all willing to listen to each other, right? We hit all the spectrums today, and I really appreciate that. And I think this is how things happen: empathy and listening.
Yeah, it's been quite the heartwarming conversation. And I think my main takeaway is the same thing that you're saying, Arthur, which is this idea of literally every single person, based on the fact that they have a myriad of different experiences, has something to add to the conversation. Every single person, even for me, I can grow and evolve from hearing every single person. So for me to do anything where I'm like, oh, no, you're a white supremacist. Oh, nope, you're a cop. Oh, no, you're black. And I can't receive information from you, just limits the own expansion of my own potential. Kind of like what Daniel was saying, was like somebody was like, oh, before you even started talking, I cut off any juice that I could have gotten from that conversation. I think if there's anything I want anybody to walk away from with this conversation, is there's literally nobody on this planet that cannot provide you value after an empathetic, deep conversation. And I also got a note that Jonathan Tropa has something he needs to get off his chest. So go ahead and drop a bomb on us.
I don't know that I'm going to drop a bomb. But what's missing for me in this conversation is finding the bright spots. There are campaigns that have succeeded in the face of unexpected, campaigns that succeeded where people didn't expect them to succeed. And the question is, how did they do it? Like in the 50s, when the Montgomery bus boycott and other campaigns got going and created a substructure of empowerment from the ground up in the African American community in the South, in the middle of Jim Crow, they were able to create the conditions for the civil rights movement of the early 60s, where Martin Luther King Jr. consciously, and all the people who are with him, we talk about him as though he were the leader, and he wasn't. There was a huge substructure of leaders. They consciously put themselves in harm's way to illustrate to the world just how bad things are. And people saw it on television who didn't really have an idea of what was going on and were shocked. And in a short period of time, a few years, compared to the decades and decades of activism that had not penetrated the federal government's structure of oppressive laws, they were able to create tremendous breakthroughs. And so rather than focusing on what is disempowering and getting angry at people for wherever they are, because they are where they are, find people where they are who are able to take one more step forward and one more step forward to put their voices into supporting things that are going to make a real difference. I put in the chat about Black Lives Matter putting out a budget that's generally ignored, a proposed budget for LA that says, let's redistribute some of that, more than 50% of the LA city discretionary budget that goes to the LAPD. Police are doing things that they're not specialized for, where de-escalation would be better. There are all sorts of, I don't need to go into the policy part. You all can probably speak on it just as well. If there were more people who were understood to be this far away from going out to support that, bring those people along. And all of a sudden, you get a shift. LA City Council listened to Black Lives Matter this year in a way that had not been done before. The difference between listening to Black Lives Matter and actually making significant structural changes that would change the education, the food security, the ability to de-escalate all of those violent challenges that Brian was talking about, and to de-escalate situations that would have resulted in police brutality. If budget is put in favor of that, then there may be more of a substructure of leaders ready to step forward than you might imagine. I'll give you an example. An African-American man, so I was on one of Congresswoman Karen Bass's town halls, and an African-American man said, not enough is being done in our community to deal with Black on Black violence. And rather than shutting him down, which it happens when people raise that topic, she said, you know what? There are more people in our community who are quietly doing things about it than people realize. And if we can get more support to them, we may be able to do more about it. That kind of moving things forward is going to, both those kinds of moving things forward is going to make a bigger difference. There are a lot of people,
what I'm hearing you say, Jonathan, is that essentially, not to cut you off, but the thing that I'm hearing you say is to bring attention to the positive spots, right? Because there is progress being made, right? Am I clear on that?
I'm less interested in just bringing attention to them, because awareness is nice, but it's not effective. What's effective is bringing awareness to people who are ready to take the next step. Here is something additional you can do that will actually make a significant difference. I've been involved in political campaigns where our candidate lost by 1 vote per precinct. And I've seen the other side as well. If more people turned out to support the Black Lives Matter budget, would the LA City Council start making some structural changes that would make it possible for the leaders that Karen Bass talked about to make a bigger difference, to create more educational opportunities so there are way more people like Brian going into the tech world? And on the other side, Black Lives Matter has created a consciousness in the tech world, just as Me Too did as well, and other organizations where people are putting effort into what can we do to create true belonging for all the different diverse people in our organization, and how can we create better pipelines from marginalized communities into our organizations so
Turn it
that
into
there's
action.
real opportunity. Exactly.
Gotcha.
Find where the spots are, where leverage is possible, and direct people's activity towards that. Some of the uncomfortable racist concepts that people have in their conversations kind of drift away when they start getting active in favor of things that they realize are just one step away from where they are now. Those things suddenly seem reasonable, and suddenly those old ideas that they used to have, you know, they can put them aside. They're the old me, not the new me. I think there's more possibility for transformation that way than by butting heads, calling out, and having debates with people who aren't the decision makers. Focus on the decision makers and moving them, and then you move mountains. Back to you.
Yes, thank you, sir. You had a lot on your chest.
Yes, I did. But thank you very much for giving me the space. I've been trying to think, how am I going to put all this?
It's okay, man. You did beautifully. And I love your background.
Thank you. One more thing. I highly recommend watching other people on their journeys. I loved listening to Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates on Audible, because you get to hear his inflection as he's reading. And if you've seen his testimony in favor of HR 40, the reparations bill last year, he is inspiring to listen to. And you get to watch him on his journey. Ibram X. Kendi in How to Be an Anti-Racist takes you on his journey as well. And they are both amazing books. I have found out that a whole bunch of friends of mine, coincidentally, are reading those and others. And we're all on this journey of development together because of what's happened. George Floyd's death was not in vain, because look at all the beautiful changes that are taking place and the possibility of real change that might actually collapse the school to prison pipeline. Okay, now back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Jonathan. Appreciate you. And I know I have some thoughts from Arthur, who wants to wrap it up for us before we go to Dr. Christina Weber. Go ahead, Arthur. Bring it home for us.
Yeah, Jonathan, thank you so much for sharing. And if you guys know me and are in relationship with me, this is going to sound repetitive, and you know that I've been saying this a lot throughout COVID. But there's two other times in history where we've experienced the global pandemic where things were shut down. The first time was in the 1300s, and it was the plague, right? The Black Death, where like a third of the population of Europe was decimated and people were just dying left and right. The other time was the Spanish flu. I just want you guys to know, you know, as heavy as it is to talk about the things that we are talking about, there is a light at the end of the tunnel. If you look back on history, after the plague, after the Black Death, it ushered in a new era of humanity called the Renaissance. And the Renaissance, actually, before the Renaissance, it was the Middle Ages of man. And after the Renaissance, it turned into modernism, where all these people were dying, and man or women, but the humanity's consciousness shifted into, from where we go when we die. It was hyper-religious, and people were concerned about where they go when they die. And then the Renaissance movement ushered in modernism, where we started thinking about how we get to live. Humanism, personal development, all of that stuff was birthed, and it seeped its way into arts, to literature, to government, to everything. Humanity changed from the plague. The last time we saw this, we've heard a lot about the Spanish flu. It was the Spanish flu, 1918, and it slowly dissipated. In 1920 in America, women got the right to vote. They got the right to vote. Out of the ashes of the Spanish flu, this global pandemic, women got the right to vote, and it changed. It changed America forever. Was it enough? No, but it was a huge step. And so after these sorts of events throughout history, amazing things happen when amazing people come together and do amazing things. And throughout COVID, I've been wondering, I wonder what's going to happen after COVID. And I am supremely grateful that Black Lives Matter has come to the front of our consciousness. And I am excited, and I am in the deep belief that something amazing will be birthed from this. And like Jonathan so beautifully said, George Floyd's death and all the deaths, they're not going to be in vain. When people like us come together, have these conversations, and do something about it.
So motivational. Thank you, brother. The thing that I get from that is that when we as a collective or as individuals are faced with the very real prospect of death, we start to realize, okay, the reality in which we're operating gets to have a shift. It gets to have some kind of transformation, right? The life that I was living does not work anymore. And for us, as we move through COVID and into this next stage, the thing I would invite us to shift on is this idea of separateness has never, will never, and is not serving us right now. Yeah? So I'm going to leave it on that, and I'm going to give it to the illustrious Christina Weber to make her lovely announcements, and we can wrap up the evening and you all can go back to your transformative lives.
Thank you so much. Well, first off, I've actually been craving to even share some perspectives. So I'm going to add just a final piece to the conversation as well, of things that have been on my mind and questions and thoughts around this topic, especially because, you know, today is the final Real Talk. So we launched this series on Wednesday. Like I think like the George Floyd murder happened on a Thursday, I believe. The protest and riots began on a Friday, really Friday evening in LA is when we started seeing live footage of what was happening in downtown LA. And then from there, the weekend broke out. And the first one that we did was on a Wednesday when there was still helicopters flying around a lot of our heads during that first conversation. So thank you all for joining week after week. First off, I'll say to acknowledge is that, you know, we started this and we really hit a trigger point initially where we had 150 people join that first Real Talk. The second one, we had about, I guess, 60 people join. And this one, we had about 40 people at its high point. So I think it's really important that we have these conversations, and this is just one conversation that is part of a whole collective conversation about you know, I love how author you said is like, how do we want to live? Like, what world do we want to redesign right now? And I believe that a lot of what we're seeing is a spiritual malnutrition, just overall, a spiritual malnutrition, and of us forgetting that we are spiritual beings having a human experience. Something that I put in the chat, and this might be controversial a little bit, but you know, when you talk about racists, like people who are racist, like it's also like, well, I bet you those people are fucking assholes too, pardon my language. And so, and I heard, you know, if we even, I heard, and this man's sort of controversial as we get into conspiracy theories and stuff, but David Icke, if anyone's heard of David Icke, he's been, I listened to his documentary on his life is on, it's on the Gaia Network, and you can find it in other places. It's called The Renegade. And he talks about label consciousness. And he asks this question, like, are we a world that is just super offended? Like, are we just offended by everything that happens? And in label consciousness, again, this is just a thought. It's a little controversial to throw into the mix, I understand, but label consciousness, like if we're spiritual beings having a human experience, and I understand the, like, I want to preference this, like I understand the need to see color, or actually the nuance or the paradoxical aspect of the need to see color, but also it's just like we're consciousness having a, you know, consciousness, different vehicle, different color skin, consciousness, we're awareness. We are, you know, LGBT, we are, it's different experience, same consciousness. So, and then to roll it even a little bit further, as I've been like diving into, you know, the people that like spark new thoughts within me, is that, you know, there's that guy, the people who channel this guy, Bashar. And Bashar was recently saying he was talking about this as it relates to the coronavirus, but I think we can correlate it to raising with racism and a whole bunch of other issues. But he says that, you know, in order to quote end racism or end the coronavirus, it needs to not exist within our reality. And if so then it's almost, we all have to like, and I don't know how this happens, this is why we can end on this point of like a thought, but like if in my reality, and this again, it can be controversial, in my reality, I say racism doesn't exist. It's not existing. And then we all agree it doesn't exist in my reality, it doesn't exist in my reality, it doesn't exist in my reality. Same with, you know, eventually, you know, I know we're soaring in coronavirus right now, but like eventually getting to a place where coronavirus doesn't exist in my reality. Take it from this, what then you have to dismantle this whole system that and for ease, because I know racism can get a little bit just more in depth there, but like for instance, coronavirus doesn't exist in my reality. Well, it's interesting to then look at, well, who benefits from the coronavirus? There's all these mask businesses that are popping up. They're not going to want to stop the coronavirus because then they can't sell their masks. So same, you know, when you look at racism, like who benefits from racism? And I know that's a controversial thought to just throw out there. And I love having these conversations because I'm not my thoughts. It's just things that are going through my head. But in the reality, how do we create a reality that ends racism? Do we benefit from racism in some way, and who does? And then how do we really just take it apart? And I look forward to continuing conversations on this topic and all of the hard topics and having more dialogue. And I'm excited that we're getting to do this here, you know, through WeDeepen and with all of our, you know, Imari and Brian and Arthur and all of you all saying yes to being here today. So thank you for that. And that's my final rant on this particular topic. I am going to stay in this space for after 7. So we end this at 7. Anybody who wants to stay and do a little like after party and continue dialogue, Imari is going to exit out. Whoever exits out, I'll stay in the space for about another hour and we can continue going. So I also like, as we're wrapping up, because we have 10 more minutes to 7, Brian, Martinez, is there anything that you want to share with the group that you have coming up or about you and where to find you? I see your Instagrams in there. Any just a final thought or where to find you would be great to share.
Anything coming up?
Yeah, like
am I missing something? Do I have something coming up, Arthur?
I will make the announcement for you, Brian. Brian is an eligible bachelor. He is very handsome.
Oh my
he
God.
works out every day. He can run 7 miles straight sprinting. He is conscious. He is successful. He's very smart and hardworking.
I love that.
Thank you.
Because WeDeepen initially underneath the ball, it was actually, you know, we've expanded into something else, but we started as like dating platform. So
I like that Christina actually is taking that seriously now, like working it into her pitch. It's amazing.
Yeah, things for me. I'm launching a newsletter. So if anyone's interested in joining that newsletter, feel free to reach out to me on Twitter. And probably launching a new business soon. I've been turning down some full-time offers just to like stay my path and jump back in entrepreneurship because it's been a while. So connect with me on Twitter and maybe I'll tell you some more. How about that? Does that count as an announcement?
Perfect. Yes. Thank you.
All right.
And Arthur, what about you? Anything with the Atlas project?
There's many of you on this call. The Atlas project is on hold, on hiatus until COVID is over. So we'll see how that goes. But thanks for asking. But you know, I think my only announcement here is invest in yourself. Take a look at your own biases. Spend time, and it seems like this is a conscious community, but we all just get to look at ourselves and Sometimes, at least for me, it feels like I can't change the world, but what I can do is just be the best person I can be every single day. And I feel like if everyone did that, it would be a better place to live. Less and less, I think it's going to be not one person that comes back to Earth and changes the world like Martin Luther King Jr. It's just going to be a collection of us who show up every single day, no matter what. And if enough of us do that, then yeah, the world changes.
Thank you. And I'm going to throw it back to Imari, and then after, see if he has programs or anything to share with you. I know he's a phenomenal coach. I set him up with a call with my brother, and that rocked his world. So
It changed his entire reality.
Yeah. And then I'm going to tell you all a little bit about some programs coming up as well with Deepen.
Yeah, I mean, tonight we all focus on this conversation of how can we shift our perspectives, how can we shift our limiting beliefs so that the world and the collective and the things that we look at will shift. For me as a coach, my focus is how do I take that and use it on just your life, right? Like, how do we turn Jillian's life into what we want it to be? How do we turn Jonathan's and Jen's and David's? How do we maximize and activate the potential that's within you and get the whole fucking shitty, I'm not good enough, or I was never loved. We get all that shit out of the way and we focus on what are we actually trying to create in your life. That's what I like to do. And in the meantime, I jump on conversation with Christina and I talk about human stuff that I care about. So if anybody's interested in any of that coaching, feel free to follow me, King Imari, King with a Y, a dot in between King and Imari. And yeah, I appreciate this conversation, for real, for real, for real. I thoroughly enjoy the perspectives that were given. I thoroughly, even more so, enjoy that people who had conflicting perspectives still were able to receive and enjoy and hear from the other side. To me, that is more interesting than what we're actually saying. The process is more interesting to me than the content at times. Yeah, that's it. I appreciate y'all. Is there anything else I should say, Christina?
Well, I'm going to show, Jenna had sent me a message and asked about, real talk and continuing, because there's a desire to continue to have conversations about a lot of other topics. And on July 29th, that's Wednesday, July 29th, Real Talk will become Yes and Imari will host or guide that experience. And each week we'll invite 2 other thought contributors in to discuss a whole array of topics that we'll get into. One of them, I'm thinking of throwing in, we'll brainstorm them, but like mind control, like I want to discuss some mind control. Who can mind control you? As that's a big topic. So that's going to be Wednesday, July 29th. We'll reconvene as Real Talk becomes Yes and then,
Can I speak into that real quick, Christina?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, so just so everybody knows what that'll look like going forward, I know the last couple of times we did this, we were talking about race. For me, there's a lot more things that we can talk about as humans than just race. So going forward, every episode will start with a question, like you guys saw the question today, right? It was, can the fight to end racism create more racism? Going forward, we're always going to have a question, whether it's dealing with sex or politics or just life in general, philosophy, just interesting questions will be submitted, and we'll just bring in people who will have interesting perspectives on them. So that'll be like the general format going forward. Interesting question leads to interesting conversation. Cool.
And then within that, this is inspired. This is the format of the experience is this, and this will be distributed as a podcast and be able to watch on demand later. So you'll be a part of the conversation that will be recorded and set out. So we're calling this new wave of media, online interactive podcasting experiences. And then the other one, so next week we launch on Wednesday, is Mind Sports. Mind Sports is guided by Indy Reshi, and he calls himself a neuroplastician. He's also a laughologist. He generally has taught a lot of people how to laugh and have more humor in their life. And he's going to be guiding this experience, Mind Sports, which is debates. We're going to, as sports, we're not necessarily getting out sports, but this is going to be a mind sports activity. And the first debate next week is going to be wearing a mask versus not wearing a mask. So we're going to have 2 different teams. Already he has a lawyer on the no mask team and a doctor on the mask team. And so we're going to be populating those teams and go into an interactive debate next week. Also tomorrow is Unleash, a guided dance journey by Yadi Iksa. And this has been a live experience happening in LA that many of you has been to if you've been to Deepen experience before. And so we're gonna dance tomorrow, 5 Pacific time to 6:45. So come join us for that. And then the last, also I'll leave you with is also tomorrow's Co-preneurs, which is an experience where entrepreneurs come together and they mastermind. So that is tomorrow at 5 Pacific time and 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So come in and join us. You can see more at WeDeepen.com. And that's pretty much what I have. If you guys want to stay in and riff on today's topic and go into some other issues, I'm going to stick around and we can chat. And it was so good having you all here. And I also want to thank Kelly and David on my team Deepen, because this happens today because of their efforts, and everyone for saying yes. So thank you all for joining in, and also please share these experiences, invite other people into the dialogue. I think what we have such a great opportunity right now to do is all the mental stimulation and the heart stimulation that we've been having access to in the cities of Los Angeles and LA and San Francisco is the time to disperse that information and bring our parents and families into the dialogue. So please invite them to join stuff with you too as well. Cool. Thank you guys so much, and feel free to stick around and let's chat.
I'm headed out. Appreciate you all. Thank you for jumping in. Jen in Australia, I see you. Thank you very much. Adios, y'all. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Bye.
Arthur and Brian.
Bye, guys.